We're going to continue talking about how consumers make decisions. This is part 2 of consumer decision making. So if you remember from part 1, we were talking about the process by which consumers make decisions, and we were breaking it down into different stages. So first stage being realizing that consumer has a problem or an opportunity that they want to tackle. Then doing some information search where you're going to collect the relevant information that it's going to move you or help you move into a situation where you can make a decision. That information search could be either internal, where you pull from memory some of the experiences with the product or brand, or it could be external, where you collect information either from smartphone about the product, or maybe at the store, or you ask some of your friends about it, right, or family members. Okay, they might have had past experiences with the product or the brand. Okay, we've already talked about those two, and now we're going to start with the third step, which is the evaluation of alternatives. So how do we evaluate alternatives? How we evaluate the products that we actually are going to consider to make a decision about them? Okay, the first step is we do not choose products or brands that we are not aware of, right? So that is the minimum threshold for you to consider a product, and that's going to essentially filter a lot of the options in the marketplace. And the technical way in which we describe this group of brands that we actually know is the evoke set. Okay, so the evoke set is the alternative products or options that the consumer actually is aware of. Okay. Okay, so that's the absolute minimum. This is why a lot of brands in the marketplace are going to be measuring brand awareness, which is whether you've heard of the brand or not. Because if you haven't heard of the brand, you are not going to consider the brand for the most part. Okay, so the evoke set is the first step that we need to cross if we are a marketer into basically getting to have the consumer choose our brands or our products. Okay. Then after that, we have the consideration set. This is a smaller set of brands that are the ones that the consumer thinks are good enough to be thought about, right? So not all the brands that you know are going to be brands that you're going to be comfortable purchasing. So moving from the evoke set to the consideration set is another step, getting closer to being chosen for the consumer. Okay, good. So having said that, once that we are in the consideration set, what consumers are going to do is they are going to look at the features of the product, right? Features are everything from brand, like we've talked before, price, basic feature, right? And then any other functional or non-functional attributes of the product that make the product unique, right? So if we are talking about a pen, for example, okay, what kind of features does a pen have? Well, there is the design of the pen, right? What kind of materials are used in the pen, right? Is it made out of metal or is it made out of plastic, right? And within metal, there are different metals, and plastics, there are different plastics. You could use composite, carbon fiber. If you want to go exotic, you can have pens made out of titanium and other rare metals that make them more valuable, right? More unique, maybe. Okay. What else are features on a pen? Also, the kind of mechanism that is actually used for the pen. Some pens are screwed, like they have screw tops. There are some pens that have a button that you push. There are other pens that just have a simple cap that you remove, right? So that's another feature of the pen. What other features does a pen have? What kind of ink is used? Not only the color, but also, is it a gel? Is it a traditional ink? Or instead of a pen, are we talking about a device that has multiple mechanisms inside, where you can have a pen, a pencil, and maybe, a tablet, stylus, all combined within one pen, and you can just choose which one of those actually you can pull out, right? So that will be if you have a more complex device that kind of does the same thing as the pen plus maybe other functions, right? Those are all features. And what has happened over the years as the market gets more competitive is that the number of features that are available in the marketplace has increased dramatically. I think nothing showcases that more than the phone, right? I mean, if you look at smartphones, they have so many features added to them, right? If you study the marketplace, original phones just were a phone. There was nothing else to it. But as phones moved from being just a device that was analog to something that was digital, what started happening is companies realized that they could keep adding functionality into the phone by adding additional components to it, right? So when it moved from just the phone to being a small computer, companies started adding, for example, sensors and other networking options to the phone. And so when you start adding sensors to the phone, for example, now the phone knows in what direction it's oriented, and you can actually use that for further functionality, right? Or you can have a sensor that notices what's in front of the phone, like some of the Samsung phones, right? Or you can just use gestures without touching the phone to actually activate some of the functions in the phone, right? So the number of features in phones has increased, I would say, close to exponentially, right? And that's something that has happened in many product categories, right? And that makes the choice for consumers difficult. Why? Because the more features that you actually consider, the more time you're going to have to devote to the choice process so that you can process all that information from all those different features for all the different options that you have in your consideration set. And then you need to make a decision, right? And we're going to talk about some of the rules or decision criteria that you can use to put together all those different features in the phone, on the product in general. Okay. And then after you make a choice, the last stage in the process is post-purchase evaluation. Okay. And here is where basically you decide over time whether the purchase that you made was actually the right purchase. Now I posted in the description of the previous video a link to a video by Professor Swartz that basically explains how as the number of choices increases, the satisfaction with your choice is actually going to come down. And the reason why is because you're going to blame yourself for not picking the right product, given that there are so many products out there. If there is only one or two choices, if you couldn't find a good product, it's not your fault, right? It's that it's not available in the marketplace. But if you have 150 different salad dressings, right? If you didn't pick a salad dressing you liked, it's probably your fault, right? Because you didn't pick the right one. It was probably out there in the marketplace, right? So post-purchase evaluation is going to basically do this, right? It's going to be looking at whether the choice that you made was actually the right choice, right? And you're also going to have sometimes regret about your purchase, right? And situations like that, you're going to be basically wondering, why didn't you choose something else? Now, one thing that is interesting in marketing recently is, well, recently in the last 20 years, is how we've been moving from asking people about some of these questions to actually trying to use sensors or imaging technology that enable us to see the physical changes in the body to try to determine what actually is happening in the mind of the consumer. Why do we do that? At least two reasons. One is because people lie, right? And by lying, I don't mean like maliciously. It's just that people forget, or people maybe don't have a clear answer to some of the questions, right? How do you feel? Sometimes it's hard to explain, right? And so maybe better than lying, people provide inaccurate information oftentimes when you actually ask them questions. And the second reason why is because we're trying to come up with maybe underlying mechanisms that the consumer is not aware of. Sometimes we do things without really noticing or thinking why we're doing them. We've talked about how a lot of the decisions are actually made as a snap judgment, something that happens really quick, where we actually use emotion, maybe without cognitively processing the information carefully. And in situations like that, it is doubtful that asking the consumer will actually yield a truthful answer. And it's not because they don't want to give it to you, it's because they might not know, right? So the idea of neuromarketing is actually trying to understand the biofunctioning of the body and what kind of reactions we can actually measure and use to determine what is actually happening. The cutting edge research in this area uses technology like fMRI, which is basically an imaging technology that is used in healthcare usually to, for example, find tumors or any other abnormalities in diagnosis of disease, to see what kind of brain activity patterns we can identify when consumers are responding to things like ads, for example, right? And we have learned over the years by using this technology that there are different areas of the brain that light up. And when I say light up, is that they have increased blood flow. So because of that, we assume that there is increased activity on those areas of the brain when consumers experience different reactions. So when you're excited, or when you're scared, or when you're worried, or when you're sad, or when you're happy, there are different areas of the brain that actually have higher levels of blood flow. And we can use this and other maybe more simplistic techniques like looking at skin conductivity, which is going to be a measure of the amount of sweat or perspiration that actually you have. This is used, for example, not only for marketing purposes to measure things like excitement, but also is used in a traditional polygraph test, right? Where you're actually trying to determine whether somebody is telling the truth or not, right? Which you can see in the movies, how they hook them up to a bunch of sensors, right? One of the sensors, it measures the conductivity of the skin, right? So you can use all these sensors to try to determine what kind of feelings and what kind of reactions we are getting from people beyond maybe what they can accurately or simply describe. So we've talked about decision making in general for consumers. Now, how is it different when you go in an online setting? Well, the actual decision process is the same, but technology can enable consumers to actually make those decisions easier, right? So let's talk about some of the technologies that are used online for us to make decisions about products and brands in general easier. First, you have cybermeteries. These are webs or apps that basically help you narrow down the choices or do the search for products or prices or both easier, right? So there are companies like Zebra, for example, that help consumers make better decisions when it comes down to finding products like insurance, right? So you go there, you type in what it is that you're looking for, car insurance, for what car you're looking for, and what are some of your basic demographic patterns. And with that information, the cybermetery goes out into the different insurance companies and pulls all the information and gives you quotes so that you don't have to go to Progressive and to State Farm and fill out all the forms. You fill out the forms one time, and this essentially enables you to do a more efficient search, in this case for insurance, but this can be used for other products as well. And this kind of helps in the process, for example, of information search, and also narrowing down some of the options maybe based on some criteria, right? So you can maybe create a consideration set really quickly because you don't have to look at all the features. The program is actually going to do some of that filtering for you. Okay, the technology that underlines a lot of these cybermeteries is this idea of intelligent agents. You will also hear about artificial intelligence, which is the basic math that goes underneath these intelligent agents to basically search and find that information. Essentially, this is, if you know anything about regression, which is a statistical technique that maybe you've actually been exposed to. Intelligent agents will use some sort of predictive model similar, maybe a more fancy version of regression, to basically make a yes-no decision to different products. Okay, and for that, it's going to use all the information that it has available for you, whether it's demographics, whether it's just past history of purchases. Good example of this, for example, is the movie suggestion algorithm that is used by Netflix and others like Amazon Prime, right? So they have a large catalog of movies, and browsing through that, it's a monumental task. So to help you in the process, what they do is they make suggestions, maybe based on different criteria, right? So those suggestions are built by looking at your past history, at your demographics, and how those two mirror with the suggestions and options that other people have chosen, right? And they hopefully give you a better chance of finding a movie or a show that you are actually interested in, right? So that's the idea behind intelligent agents and artificial intelligence applied to decision making, right? Another piece of the puzzle online is the idea of a search engine, which everybody knows right now. So there is so much information out there that could potentially, for example, help you in the process of making a decision, that you have these search engines that basically use an algorithm, more math, right, to find the websites or pieces of information that are potentially useful for the search that you have actually typed. I don't think I need to tell you about search engines. You probably know more than I do, right? Now, the idea from the business perspective of this is, well, if I have a page, a website that I've created about my product, how do I actually make sure that my page is ranked up and it shows in, let's say, the top searches from search engines like Google or Bing? Well, what we're going to do then is something called search engine optimization, which is make sure that our page has the right links and the right keywords in there that are going to enable us to come to the top of the search results. If you are on the top 2 or 3, people are a lot more likely to click on your page, because people are usually not going to browse through multiple pages of links before they actually find the information that they are interested in. So because of that, nowadays search engine optimization plays a very important role in the design of websites and apps in general. Okay. And a way of seeing this, or a consequence of having access to so many products and being online with so much information out there, is this idea of a long tail, right? Which is that if you look at the number of unique products, and the same thing, number of unique websites associated with any piece of information, and there is a very small number of products that are very popular. So for example, you can see this with music, right? Take songs in general. How many songs are there, right, from different artists and groups? And the answer is literally billions, right? So, and if you look at, if you were to draw a diagram with all the number of songs, you will find that there are only a very small portion of songs that are played disproportionately a large number of times. So people really, really like some songs, right? And those songs are listened to and purchased all the time. Whereas there is a really, really large number of songs that are not popular at all, right? So we talk about this as a long tail. Now, in the past, if you were, songwriter or a performer, right, odds that you were going to be making money were really low, because finding people that will actually like your product was actually difficult, right? Nowadays, however, because of technology and because of online shopping, even people that are at the end on this long tail that you can see in the diagram right there, and they still have a chance of making some money. And the reason why is because now you can target and you can find some of these people that before were actually very hard to find. So if you're trying to make a product that is very unique, right, that you think very few people will be interested in, there is still a business model that you can actually use, especially using digital marketing and finding these communities of people that are interested in very specialty products, because now you can actually reach them, right? Before this was very hard. So for example, if you're a pen enthusiast, right, whatever that means. So if you're somebody who collects pens, right, that was probably a small group of people. And within pen enthusiasts, if you're interested in pens that are made of a particular material, let's say titanium and carbon fiber, right, that is a very, 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 very small piece of the pen market, right? However, nowadays you can target these customers because they organize themselves in communities, and because of that you are able actually to reach them. This was something that was not possible before with traditional marketing, but thanks to technology now you can reach strange and unique niches like those. Now, the way we make decisions, oftentimes it eliminates products that are not consistent with what we consider a product category. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, when we identify the problem, we start making decisions about what products we're gonna consider, what goes into the consideration set. Something that is very important for us to understand is how consumers make categories of products, because if we are not part of the right category, what's going to happen is people are not going to put us into their consideration sets. So understanding product categorization is very important for us, because it's going to dictate to a large degree whether our products are going to be part of the decisions that people are making or not. Okay, and also when will they be part of them, right? So here you have, for example, and by the way, humans are particularly fascinating this way because we categorize information. This is one of the functions that our brain are particularly good at doing is abstraction, right? It's finding patterns in general. And one of the more typical patterns when it comes down to objects is categorization, right? We put things into buckets so that we can actually make decisions about them easier. Right? So as you can see here, there are different levels of categorization, right? So you have a superordinate level, which is this broad category. In this case, the category will be dessert for the simple example that you have in here, right? But it could be anything. It could be, for example, communication device, right? Or anything else for that matter. If we were talking about pens before, maybe writing instrument, right? Something that you use to write or to draw with. I don't know. You get the point. Okay, that will be a superordinate level. That will be a very high level of abstraction where we just put things into that category. So what is considered a dessert, by the way, that will vary from culture to culture, right? Not everything that is considered dessert in one culture might actually be considered dessert in another. So there are cultural aspects that will maybe shift dramatically what these categories correspond to from one culture to another. Okay, so I'm assuming that we're all in the same culture. So you have the superordinate level, then you have the basic level. This is the one that contains probably the most useful information for marketers, which is within this superordinate level, we're gonna basically identify groups of products that have similar characteristics. So here you have, for example, full fat desserts versus low fat or no fat desserts. Right, so if you're maybe having diet considerations, like we were talking about before, maybe this categorization will be relevant for you because usually fat has high caloric content, is 9 calories per gram versus 4 calories per gram for carbohydrates or protein. So because of that, desserts that are more fattening, they tend to be more high in caloric density, and because of that, if you're on a diet, probably fattening desserts are less encouraged because you're going to have more calories going into them, right? So then you might make this categorization, and if you're on a diet, you may only consider the non-fattening desserts. This is why categorization is important when you're making choices, because it's going to basically put you inside or outside of the consideration set from the consumer. And then within this basic level, which might dictate a lot of your purchase decision process, then you might have different subordinate levels. So in this case, from non-fattening desserts, we might choose between fruit, yogurt, and like you have here, low-fat ice cream, right? Now notice one thing, you can go deeper in categories than subordinate level, right? So then you might have fruit, but then within fruit you might have different categories within fruit. So maybe you have citrus, right? And then you have oranges and grapefruits and lemons, right? And they are all considered similar to you, or maybe very different. Actually, that's a good example where maybe you might consider some of those fruits that are relevant for dessert, like maybe oranges and grapefruit, but you might not consider maybe lemons or limes as part of dessert because maybe they are too tart for you and not sweet enough to be considered dessert, right? So this categorization can actually have more nuances that at subordinate level it can actually get deeper, and how deep the rabbit hole goes. It's really up to the consumer and how involved they are in the product category, right? If you know a lot about the product category, you tend to categorize things more deeply and carefully. If you're a novice, your categorization of the product category might be all in one lump. You don't know anything. Like, for example, if you're buying a product that you don't know anything about, like when you have a kid for the first time, maybe you don't know anything about diapers. So all diapers are placed in the same category. I don't know anything about them. And then you start learning because you have to buy them. And as you learn, maybe, you create some categories of brands, like you have disposable diapers versus non-disposable diapers. Maybe you didn't know that even existed before, right? So these categories are very important in our decision-making process because they're going to guide what goes into our consideration set and what doesn't. Okay, now more implications of product categorization. First, what categories consumers are considering are going to determine things like how you position a product, right? So if people consider your product part of breakfast foods, right, eggs, for example, in this country, then the way you're going to position a product, if you're actually selling that product, it's going to be very different than if you go to another country. We're talking about cultural considerations before. If you go to Spain, for example, eggs are traditionally eaten for dinner or snacks, but not for breakfast, right? So the way you're going to position the product is going to be very different depending on how it's categorized by the consumers, okay? Also, what competitors you're going to have are going to be a function of that categorization, right? If you look at transportation, for example, and depending on what's considered competing with what, you're going to consider something a competitor or not, right? So, for example, in many cities in the United States, public transportation is not a big competitor to cars, and the reason why is because if you live in a city that is organized with large suburban areas where public transportation doesn't actually reach, you will not be considering public transportation as a direct competitor to cars. Whereas if you go to other cities like New York, for example, where public transportation is actually a direct competitor to cars, the way you actually identify competition is going to be very different. Okay, so categorization determines your positioning, it determines who your competitors are. One aspect important within categorization is that not every product is considered as an equal within the category, right? And the variable that it's used to describe this is called product prototypicality. Let's see if I can say that right. Okay, product prototypicality. And what that means is when we think about a product in a product category in concrete, how typical is that product of the product category? For example, if you start thinking about electric cars, right, as being a broad category or maybe a subcategory within the car market, right? What probably comes to mind right now for you will be a Tesla. So the Tesla, and maybe, I don't know, Tesla Model 3, right? So the Tesla Model 3 for you will be the prototypical electric car. Why? Because you've seen a lot of them on the street. Maybe you know somebody who actually owns one. And when you think about electric cars, that is the typical product that you're thinking. It's something that is rear-wheel drive, that has a battery that can go for at least 200 miles, that has fast chargers, that has a network of chargers that are owned by the company. Now, it's funny because this is not true for many other products within the electric car market. So if you take a Nissan Leaf, for example, it's very different in many of those aspects that I've actually discussed, but it's not prototypical. It's not what you are thinking about. So a lot of these features that maybe the prototypical car has are going to become needed features for others to compete in this space because of this central role that some products actually play. So in a way, typical products within a product category dictate what attributes are competed on. So it's going to dictate what competitors are going to have to do, right? And they're going to set a threshold of what is expected within the product category. So it's actually important. If you can be a prototypical product, there's a chance that you're going to be able to dictate how competition actually happens within that space. Okay. And then finally, also where products are located within the store is going to be a function of product categorization, right? So the same product could actually be in different places within the store depending on how it's categorized. So take, for example, baking soda, right? Baking soda can be seen by some people as a product that you use for baking. No surprise, right? Or, and if that's the case, it will be in the baked goods section of the store. But for some people, baking soda is used for other purposes. You can use baking soda for cleaning, right? Because it's a mild abrasive. You can also use it for elimination of odors, which is also associated with cleaning, I guess, right? And you can also use it for medicinal purposes, right? To prevent indigestion, right? So depending on which one of those uses you are thinking about, you will place the product in different places within the store, right? If it's for cleaning, it will be with the cleaning section, right? And if it's for medicinal purposes, in the pharmacy section of the store. And if you're baking soda, maybe you want to be in all three because you have multiple uses. So the location of the product in the store is going to be a function of how that product is categorized by consumers. Now, once that we have the basic category of products, the question is how do we pick one of them, right? So once that you made into consideration set. Now, we already talked a little bit about this when we were discussing the multi-attribute model for attitude creation and attitude change, right? The Fishburne model. But the idea behind a lot of the evaluative criteria that we're going to discuss is similar to this. So what consumers are going to do is they're going to rank or rate each of the products in different attributes that are relevant to them, right? So in the case of a TV, it could be, right? It could be the screen size, right? It could be the pixel density, right? So maybe by pixel density, I should maybe say better the definition, right? The number of pixels or lines that are on that screen. So if you have a 4K screen, is that there is almost about 4,000 lines in that TV. Otherwise, if it's 180, means you have about 1,000 lines, right? So there is more pixel density, and because of that, things are going to look sharper, right? Then what kind of sound capabilities they have, the brand, you know, and maybe even price, which by the way is not in this screen, but it's a criteria that you're going to use to determine which one of the TVs you're going to buy, right? And then what you're going to do is maybe you're going to have some importance rating about which one of those different attributes is more important for you as a consumer. Now these are individual specific, not everybody agrees on this, right? So maybe for me the only thing that matters is the screen size, because I want a huge screen for my man cave, right? Whatever that means. Or for other people it might be, you know, the sound quality, or it might be the brand, because they have had really good experiences with certain brands and really bad experiences with others, right? So this importance ranking is one way of expressing the fact that not every attribute is going to be equally valuable or useful for consumers. And then what you're going to do is you're going to rank or rate each of the different options that are part of your consideration set. So in this case, we have 3 TVs, right? Prime Wave, Precision, and Kamishita, whatever that means, right? And we're considering these 3. And then what we're going to do is just look at the ratings, right? Now, there are different evaluation criteria or ways of adding all this information for us to basically make a decision, okay? And different people are going to make these decisions differently. So let me walk you through the basic ones. The first one is a compensatory rule. Now, a compensatory rule, what assumes is that these different attributes, you can make up for one attribute with another. So, for example, you could have a TV that has a screen size that is maybe a little bit smaller, but by paying a lower price, we are making up for the smaller screen size, right? This will be a compensatory rule where you can just compensate literally for one of the attributes with another, okay? And the functional way of describing this is using addition, by the way. So the way you do this is if you rate each of the options using some numerical score, right? You can just add those scores, and that's going to give you a good representation of what a compensatory rule will do, because when you add things, if one number is low, you can compensate by adding a large number in the other category, okay? Now, to make this more fancy and probably more realistic, you can weight those attributes by the importance, okay? So if size is really important for me, then I'm going to give it a higher weight, and that's going to be reflected in a larger number that it's going to be added and hence play a bigger role in my decision, okay? But I want you guys to realize that this addition, which is very intuitive and simple for us, is not the way all decisions are made. In fact, a lot of decisions are not compensatory at all. So let me walk you through some maybe non-compensatory options that are in many cases more realistic. Okay, now there are different ones because there are different rules that are used by consumers. So I'm going to walk you through some of the basic ones. The first one is lexicographic rule. What this essentially means is that there is only one attribute that matters. So for example, for me, only size matters. And in a situation like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the market and I'm going to pick the largest TV that I can buy. End of the story. Nothing else is going to come into my consideration set, and when I'm making a decision, it's going to be solely based on size. Okay, that's lexicographic rule. Simple to understand. Okay. Second one is elimination by aspects. This is kind of like combining lexicographic rule with other things, right? So elimination by aspects is when we just set a minimum threshold for one characteristic, and then we make choices based on other things. For example, if you use size again, right? So you say, look, I want a TV that is at least 50 inches in diameter. So, in diagonal, right? So at least 50 inches in size, right? So I will go to the market and I'm going to eliminate any TV that is below 50 inches, okay? That will be elimination by aspects. Then I will take every other TV that is in the marketplace, meaning any TV that is larger than 50 inches, and I will just maybe use other rules, maybe a compensatory rule where I add all the other features in my weights, and I will make a decision based on that. By the way, elimination by aspects, so you can use multiple variables to do this. So you can do 50 inches, anything lower than 50, it's eliminated. And also you can take price. Anything that is higher than $1,000, eliminate it, right? So that's gonna, enable you to search for a smaller set of TVs in this case, right? Good. And the conjecture rule, it's basically when you use multiple elimination by aspect rules, okay? So what I just described, where you use size and you use also price, it's basically a conjunctive rule. When you're adding different rules, that's why the conjunctive rule comes actually from, that enable you to basically search for a smaller set of products. In my example, TVs. Now, oftentimes, the decisions that we actually make are not well thought out. They are not the cognitive, slow thinking through process that we have described so far that has all these different stages. Oftentimes what we do is we use heuristics or rules of thumbs that enables us to make decisions quickly and efficiently. Why? Because we are trying to be efficient. Some people would call it lazy. So here you have some heuristics that we use, maybe whether we are aware of not all the time. One is covariation. What that means is that two things go together, right? So for example, we tend to assume right? If we're buying a used car, that if the person has kept the car clean, there is a good chance that they probably did the maintenance as well, and because of that, the car is more likely to be reliable. We don't know that. We don't know if they just clean it last minute just for the sale. But if we see that the car is really clean, we assume, because these two things tend to go together, people that take good care of their car usually clean it, right? So because they go together, we assume that this covariation is going to help us make a better decision. So if the car is clean, chances are it will be reliable. Okay. Another rule that we use a lot is country of origin, right? So we assume that if wine comes from France, it's going to be good wine. Why? Because France is well known for wine, right? But it doesn't have to be, right? Good. So that's the idea of country of origin. We're using the location of the product or where it was manufactured so that we can actually make assumptions about the product. Other examples other than wine are obvious, right? Swiss watches, right? Japanese cars, maybe some people will think, right? Good. Another heuristic that we use all the time, and this is, I would say one of the reasons why marketing exists, right, is brand names, right? So what we're doing when we make a decision based solely on brand is we are assuming that because we have had good experiences with the brand when they, for example, come up with a new product, there is a chance that that product is going to have the same features and attributes that the old products have, right? So if you launch a new car and you're a car manufacturer that you have had good experiences with, you assume that that product is actually going to have good reliability, it's going to be well put together, etc. Right? So what we're doing is we're using brand as a heuristic to make a purchase. So we're assuming that quality is going to be related to brand because it has been in the past, right? And finally, price. Price is used as a heuristic all the time. Everybody's going to assume, for the most part, that something that is more expensive is going to have higher quality elements, like, the materials used, the way it's put together, and because of that, it's going to be basically giving you a better experience overall. Now, if you look at people that look at this price-quality relationship carefully, you will see that within price ranges, this is really not true. But if you look at it, in a broad enough perspective, if you compare cars that are $20,000 to cars that are $100,000, there is definitely a relationship between price and quality, and because of that, we end up using this heuristic all the time. Okay, now let me say the last thing that we're going to discuss, which is the way you frame a choice. Oftentimes influence the choice that is actually made by people. Now, this is counter to what a typical economist or traditional economist will tell you, right? So if you take the traditional economist approach to choice, you're assumed to be somebody who is basically looking at all the information and assessing that information carefully. And because of that, what's going to happen is the information comes your way, and the decision that you're going to make is always going to be rational, carefully, and you're going to go through all the stages that we have discussed. Because people don't do that all the time, and because a lot of the information it's either not processed or not processed appropriately, we end up having situations when, depending on how that choice is put forth, how it's framed, people make different decisions. This is something that should not happen according to traditional economic theory, but it does happen in reality. So there is a very strong psychological aspect of choice, and let's talk about some of the components of that, although we're only going to scratch the surface on this. And by the way, I will also post a link to another video that discusses this into a lot more detail by an executive from one of the largest ad agencies in the world, Ogilvy and Partners. And his name is Rory Sutherland. He's a fascinating character. He's a British marketer, very, very charismatic, I would say. Where he discusses how all this framing can really change your options and choices that are made by people. Some of the choices that he discusses are kind of funny and a little bit exuberant or esoteric, but I think they make their point really well. So I'll post that link to Rory's TED Talk. He has several, and at the bottom, right? So what do I mean by framing? Well, by framing, I mean how the choice is described to consumers will affect the choice that they make. For example, one thing that we have discovered over the last, 50 years is this idea of loss aversion. Okay, loss aversion means that in our minds, losses doom larger than gains. So if you are talking to somebody about, for example, taking a bet or putting a bet, right? What you're going to find is if you highlight what they're going to gain versus how much they're going to lose, right? The decisions that people make are very different, even if all the information is conveyed equally, right? So framing the problem in terms of gains or losses is going to have very different effects. In fact, you can think about many explanations of why this happens, but there is one particular gentleman, Kahneman, who earned a Nobel Prize for their information and research done in loss aversion and their general theory associated with it, which is called prospect theory, right? Which is depicted in this diagram right here, where you can see that basically how much we gain in anything in life, right? It could be when using a product or it could be when putting a bet, it really doesn't matter, right? So you can see the gain here, right? It's only going to take you so far, right? So there are diminishing marginal returns here to gains, meaning that the curve increases, but over time, the increase starts becoming smaller and smaller, and in the end, it flattens. Whereas with losses, this is not true, right? So the losses are going to go, they're going to go having a bigger impact on how we perceive value in a product over time, right? In fact, most research will show that losses are between 3 and 5 times more important than gains. So if you're talking dollars to dollars, how much you can win versus how much you can lose, for most people, you need to offer a 3-to-1 gains to losses for them to be comfortable with a bet, okay? So you need to realize that when I'm saying that losses are more powerful than gains, this is by a large amount. It's not by a little bit. Okay. But there are other framing effects that we see. This is probably one of the most important ones. Another framing effects that we see is the sunk cost fallacy, right? Where if you have invested heavily in a product, people are usually reluctant to get rid of the product when it's not working because they have spent so much money in the past. Right? So if you buy a car and it turns out to be a lemon, meaning that you have to fix it many times and it's still not working properly, there is a good chance that people are going to keep investing money trying to fix the car, even though they should probably just get rid of it. And the reason why is because whatever you have spent in the past should not affect your decisions for the future. What you should do is objectively look at, whether that car is a lemon or not, and based on that, just get rid of it altogether, because it's only going to bring you more negative financial impact in the future. So the sunk cost fallacy is where, the fact that we spent so much money in the past makes us more invested with the product, and because of that, we make decisions that we probably wouldn't make if that same product was given to us for free, right? Anyway, so the way we frame the problem is going to have a huge impact in what choices are actually made. And this is seen in many cases. I will also post another video that you can actually watch if you're interested in this, by Dan Ariely, who is a phenomenal behavioral economist. I think he's at Duke right now. And he talks about how the default choice that is given to us oftentimes changes dramatically the choices that we actually make, right? And so when we're talking about framing, we're not only talking about how it's framed, but also what the default choice, for example, is given versus not. And that's, I think, all we're going to talk about decisions for now. So for review, we talked about 3 different types of decisions. Cognitive, which are the ones where we spend a lot of time and effort thinking about the problem, going carefully through all the stages that we're going to describe later. Habitual, something that we do quickly and almost automatically because it has worked in the past. And affective, where we go with our gut instinct. Okay. or an affective reaction. The cognitive decision making have all these different stages. We start with problem recognition, information search, selection of alternatives. Then we choose a product using whatever decision criteria we're going to use, whether it's compensatory or non-compensatory rules. And then after that, we do a post-purchase evaluation. Are we happy with it or not? And then we do a feedback loop, right? Oftentimes the decisions that we actually make are not cognitive. We don't go through all this careful decision making all the time because it's inefficient. So what we do is we use heuristics or rules of thumb to do this. And we've discussed some of the rules of thumb, for example, covariation, where we actually use other information that we have of the product to fill in the blanks that we maybe don't have. So for example, when you take a flight, right, and somebody asks you how was the flight, you usually use for evaluation things like the food, or how rude or nice was the flight attendant, versus things about, I don't know, how skilled was the pilot or how good of a job they did in the maintenance of the plane. And the reason why is because you don't know about this. So you're assuming that if the other things are good, probably the pilot's skillful and you guys didn't get close to crashing the plane, right? Good. And finally, the way we frame choices can oftentimes lead to people make different decisions. So because of that, how we are framing a choice is actually important. So we need to understand things like product categorization, etc. And that's it.